I'm Fran Melfer, a recovering overthinker, here with Jenna Wilmers, my co-host, and we are your Ember Igniters.
Yes, thank you for tuning in. Today's topic is one that is a little close to home.
Yes, it is.
And it is on overthinking. So today we're going to have a raw conversation because, as Fran mentioned in the opening, she is a recovering overthinker.
Yes, I am. Happy to say that.
Which I'm so glad that you are, because I don't think that a lot of people realize they are overthinkers.
No, I certainly didn't, and it's very eye-opening, honestly, when you suddenly come to a place in your life and you can speak it out. I remember the first time I spoke it out was just really not very long ago, and all of a sudden I said, I think I'm a recovering overthinker. Isn't that funny? I think I'm a recovering
Right.
overthinker.
Tell us about that aha moment.
Yeah.
What was that like for you?
Well, it's interesting because it really was a series of things in my life. Early on, I would have said that I started to develop a sense that I wasn't good enough.
Oh.
And so, a lot of us feel that way. So I started to, I have said to you, right? I worked on this persona that I am. I learned how to speak well. I learned how to dress well. I learned all this stuff. And it was just a persona. Really wasn't who I was, because I thought, and I thought, and I thought some more, that this was the only way that people were going to be able to accept me, that they would see me as valuable.
What led you to wanting to start the persona?
I think it comes from my past very early on. I know all of us have pasts and we have things that we have to work on. But it's funny how as a child you interpret life a little different.
Yes.
So I come from an immigrant family, and as a result, another language was spoken in the home. And so we have these little stories, about how I knew English. I mean, we were definitely, I was born here, but my older sister wasn't. So anyway, long story. I recognized that there were words that I did not know in English because we never used them at home. And right about then, people were laughing at me.
I know, kids are so cruel.
And they don't mean it. It seems funny to them.
Right.
Right? And we as adults sometimes still do that, don't we? I mean, somebody says something wrong and we just kind of chuckle and we all just kind of play it off. But inside, it made me think, oh, I'm not the way I'm supposed to be. And that's really what started me on this journey of deciding that I needed to look educated, sound educated, walk a certain way, talk a certain way. And yeah.
I remember when I first met you, I asked you one day, like, do you even own a sweatshirt?
That's right, she did.
And I was like, because I met the persona. I didn't really, honestly, I don't know if I actually even really knew that I met a persona.
That's
until actually recently when we started discovering this and walking through this process. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to dress to the nines and look good all the time. But I really remember thinking to myself, when do you let your hair down? Like, when do you, because to be honest, as soon as I walk in my door, it's like those TikTok videos where you're dressed to the nines, you hit the door, and then you're in the yoga pants, right?
Yeah.
That's me.
That's not me.
Oh, right. And so I would come to your house, and here she is, we would be meeting, and all of a sudden she's all dressed up, and I'm like, man, it's like 9:00, and you're already dressed up, like. Well, I'm going to tell you. I thought about it, but
I just got to tell you this cute little story. So when my husband and we lived in this little house, and the houses were close. It was in Southern California, and now I'm somewhere in my, I think I'm in my 30s, and the people next door, they were this wonderful couple. I had a little baby, and I had my son who was probably 4 or 5 years old, and they would always say, every time we see you, we think of Mrs. Cleaver. Now, I know
Yes.
A lot of you don't know who Mrs. Cleaver is, but Leave It to Beaver was a very popular 50s type of show. And back then, women who were doing cooking and houseworking were always dressed in dresses.
They were, and dressed to the nines.
They were.
Hair was in place,
they had
everything.
their pumps on and their whole thing, and and so they just had this, and so they would see me go, because my laundry room was in my garage, and you had to come out the front door, and they'd always go, "You're always dressed like Mrs. Cleaver."
I can't imagine cleaning the house in high heels. Like,
no, I can't either. But
that doesn't even sound like fun. But I get that. I get that was the time, right? Yeah. But
and so I
would
suppose
not find that fun.
I suppose that's exactly what I thought. Is I have to put on something in order for people to like me, and I say that not just because of self-esteem problems, but really the thinking process. I mean, certainly a lot of us struggle with self-esteem issues. Who doesn't? So some of that played into it. But I kept thinking, what could I do? How should I look? What if I do this? Will this happen? And if that happens, then what will happen after that? And after that, I mean, it was an endless.
Or even if you do this, will this be avoided because I didn't like how that made me feel, or what it looked like?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And so I just started crafting myself that way, not really understanding it, thinking that this was the way I was supposed to look and sound and be.
I would say, because I experienced a little bit of the cruelness of kids when I was younger as well, and I would say really, I think that kids craft other people's the way they want to feel and do and be liked and all that stuff at a very young age. I've talked to many people who have experienced, bullying when they were younger, or, other situations where kids were cruel to them. And now kids these days don't leave the bullying ring because with social media, they're attached to it 24/7 now.
Yeah.
And so they start thinking about, they're constantly thinking about them.
Constantly thinking.
Of what's going on. Mm-hmm. And so they're shaping everything about their perceptions, how they think, feel, and act, all out of what other people are saying.
Yeah.
Because when you might have done something that was comfortable in your own right, you get the reception back that, oh, by the way, well, we don't think what you're doing is cool, but even though it's might be the right thing.
I think it was also an effort of trying to become perfect. So there's a level of, as I look back, these are all things I can look back on now. At the time, I would have never said that. But I think there was this thing, if I could look, sound, and be perfect. So when you start thinking perfection, your mind never stops.
Right.
Because everything in your life, every decision that you're making, we're making thousands of decisions every day.
Right.
And somewhere in there, I have to say, okay, does this meet this criteria? If not, then what do I do here? And how do I? So the mind is just, it's like a popcorn machine, going off, just popping. And I don't know if even with the perfectionism, there was, because I certainly wasn't a good student, perfection that way. I was just wanting people to like me, that kind of thing. So one of the things that I also understand is about control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What did that control? Because really, you feel like your life is out of control when you're constantly having to make decisions or be a certain persona. Because here's a question. Did you maybe have different personas for different people? Because I did. I know I did.
Oh, that is unbelievable. Yes, and yes.
And then you got to keep them all up.
Oh, my goodness, yes.
So your mind's got to constantly be going of like, well, okay, this person doesn't like this, so I can't act this way. Or this person doesn't like this, so I can't do that.
Well, we've talked about this before. It's really sort of what we would have called the chameleon.
Yes.
I'll just be whatever it is that you need me to be. Mm-hmm. If you like me being a funny person, then I will be the jokester. I'll be the life of the party. If you need me to be a serious intellectual type, then I'm going to really work on that. I'm just going to say this. We just recently had an experience where Jenna just couldn't get over the fact that I can talk about anything.
Oh, it is so true, but it cracks me up. And you got to tell them about the story about the flowers.
Well, so we were just having a really interesting photo shoot at a park, and they were asking us to pretend, that we were speaking into a mic and doing whatever. And so I just start talking, and I start talking about what I see. So in front of me, I see these black-eyed Susan flowers. They're yellow, and so I start describing them, and I'm going through the whole thing, because I want to.
No, I gotta stop here. So she's not describing them. She's like telling a whole story, and I'm just looking at her like, where in God's name did that come from? Because she's like, these are the lazy Susans, and they are yellow, and the center is black, and you know why they're black? Because of this, and I don't even remember what else you said, but it was like the perfect story, and so first off, I'm over there going, holy smokes, I was jealous, because I can't do that, pulling right out of the hat, just here you go, beautiful story, well articulated.
That has been programmed in my overthinking place. You see, I never want to be someone that doesn't have an answer.
Right.
Well, that's an insecurity. Mm. It really is an insecurity. And even now when I think of it, just thinking about it, it's like, oh, wow, even in those moments, there was a part of my overthinking coming to the top. So that's why I say I'm recovering, because it's very, very hard to rein your thought processes back, but it's doable. I am recovering.
Well, even you saying that, you have to have an answer for everything. I know from experience, because I used to be one of those people that wanted to have an answer for everything as well, too. People would then sometimes say to me, well, you're just a know-it-all. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, okay, thanks. Not really. So I can understand how that can really project that way, even though that's not really how you mean it either.
No, not really.
Were there some tendencies that happened with you that maybe you projected but you weren't really intending to, that maybe affected like leadership roles and things like that?
Yeah. Without really understanding sort of my insecurities, my desire for perfection, even the desire for some level of control of my life. When you're a leader, you cannot be thinking all the time about yourself. So consequently, without knowing it, it's what you give off. And so what happens is, what happened to me is often it would come across to people like, oh, she thinks she knows it all, or maybe she does know more than I know. So I could be intimidating to people. Well, when you're intimidating to somebody, they don't want to hang around with you.
They're also not listening to you.
They're not listening. In a team environment, if everyone's already agreed, we've had these kind of moments where you're like, okay, we agree. And I say, uh-huh. And 10 minutes later, I'm like, could we go back to that thing? Because my mind was still going on about, what if that's not the really best way to do it? Right. And so I would just go on.
I remember when we started the ministry, we were making our business cards and we were designing them. And I remember bringing them over to her house and, like a sample. And you picked up that paper and you were like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And you were just so excited. And I was like, okay, great. Because sometimes as a graphic designer, you can hit the mark and sometimes not. And so when she was like, yes, these are amazing, I'm like, okay, phew, I at least got close to the mark, right? And I figured she would have some tweaks and things like that. And, that's typical in every design process. And so that day, 10 minutes later, she gave like a few feedback. But then we were on like 2 months later and she's like, hey, so, about our business cards. And I was like, really? Like, we're 2 months down the road. Like, we're not going back there. Like, what's going on? And that was kind of a recurring cycle on some things. And before we knew what was really happening, I remember saying to her a couple times, are we really we're spinning our wheels. Like, are we ever gonna have some forward progress and move? Because I'm over here, but she's back here. and we need her to be up here, but how do I help facilitate that?
Well, can you see why we're together? When she would ask me those hard questions, where she would be blown by my coming back to things, and I just was like, really? You're upset about that? I mean, what if it's not the best? What if it, because that overthinking never lets you go. You just are constantly going on and on. It's like, well, we used to say, there's a saying that says a dog with a bone. Like he just can't let it go. And that's probably one of the bigger telltale signs of what you are as an overthinker. You don't know how to let things rest.
What are some other of those telltale signs that you're talking about?
Yeah, that's really good. Well, first of all, being an overthinker is exhausting.
Of course. I get it.
I now know this because I'm not nearly as exhausted as I used to be. I think it's mentally exhausting. It's off-putting. It puts people ill at ease when you're trying so hard. Think about it. I was trying so hard to be the kind of person that people wanted me to be, but I was really keeping everyone at arm's distance. I think it's also, you are the best to describe this, because really what happened was I could go and give, and then I was done. And I could go deep and silent. Mm-hmm. And that's the other thing that an overthinker does, is they always think there's more to the story or more to something. So I constantly wanted to dive deeper into whatever it was that we were talking, project, business card, right. Logos,
yeah,
just all of those things. And she's like, really? It's kind of sad.
But you didn't know you were doing it. And right. So, I mean, we're moving forward from that. To kind of expand upon what she was saying, there would be times where we would come into a project, maybe say it like, G, okay?
Yeah.
And we would start at G, but Fran always needed, and sometimes still does, and I understand why now, but at the time, I didn't. But Fran always needed to go back to A. And so it would, stall us for a minute until she caught up. And sometimes it was quick and sometimes it wasn't.
Oh, and that's a really important point that you made. It stalls things. Mm-hmm. I didn't even know that I was causing that to stall people. So it took extra amount of time.
Yeah.
It wasn't efficient even. And we're not, as an overthinker, we don't know we're doing that. We're keeping people from being able to move forward because there's always the next. Mm-hmm. So that was hard, because you would say, really?
I would, because because I too in my questions was also trying to understand, so that as a co-partner here, within co-business partner, right?
Yeah, yes.
I wanted to make sure that we were on the same page, mm-hmm. and I needed to understand her processing and how she does things so that we could work together to get the desired outcome, and at the pace of everybody. I know that everybody is not as fast as me. Partly
She's fast.
Because
Can I just say how fast she is? She is. But I love that.
Right. I am very fast, but it's because of how I grew up. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, technology from the time when I was young until now was exponentially on the move, and you had to learn it and keep up. And if you didn't, you got left behind. And well, at least that's what it may have felt like to your generation.
Well, I felt like I was on the cusp of all of that. Mm-hmm. So in the early days for me, anything that had to do with technology, I was up on. But it advanced so quickly.
It did.
And at some point, even for me, it's like, okay, I always like to kind of say, how a computer has a certain storage memory? We as human beings, as we get older, we only have so much storage. But here's the thing that's really cool, is that because we have difference, it has propelled me to be able to think differently. You see, mm-hmm. now I'm like, wait a minute, how do people today do it? I want to stop. I want to rest. I want to be able to hear a perspective without clicking it off in my head over and over again.
Well, over and over, really, even just like, what's the next question? Remember, we, as people, we want to engage with other people. We're made for community, but yet we always have these questions in our mind that we want to ask, and sometimes we forget to listen.
That's exactly right. That is exactly. So when I say recovering, I'm happy to say that a lot of that place where in my mind, and when I say the mind, I mean it's things like, excuse me, self-talk.
Mm-hmm.
I would have all this dialogue going on in my head, and it's hard not to believe the wrong things. So my belief system even was a little messed up as a result of all this overthinking. I wasn't putting my faith or my trust in the right places.
Wow.
It was still about me. And today, I am much more relaxed, I hope, and working towards being able to hear and put out these other voices in my head and just listen. And it's restful.
So I remember us talking about, I'm in a frog in my throat.
Happens to us all the time.
When I remember one day, I think I said to you, because you were like, man, I'm not sleepy, and I was telling you about creating habits and going to the gym, and I said, I wonder if you are mentally exhausted but not physically exhausted. And I know that one of the symptoms of overthinking is fatigue.
It is.
And can you expand upon that a little bit more? Because I want to make sure that the people who are listening kind of understand that it does affect your body as well.
Absolutely, it does. It's really about our minds. I don't know how else to say that. When we have anything going on in our mind that is incorrect thinking, our body's going to respond to it. And my body definitely responded to it. I don't know that many of you know that when we started this ministry, we had a moment where we were all prepared. We had done our strategic planning. We knew exactly when we were going to launch our very first episode. Scared, but we knew it. And one day, out of nowhere, and I mean that, one day, I absolutely could not move a muscle in my body. I couldn't raise my head off of the pillow. I couldn't turn. I couldn't do anything without excruciating pain. That should have been a real eye-opener then, and it was, but it was only the beginning of me understanding that what happens mentally, all that racing of thoughts, was affecting my very physical being. And I understand that now. I do feel more energetic. I do have a different way to look at life. So what I want to say is that a lot of us out there, we hear the word depression.
Yes.
And I would have said that I would have gone into depression.
I think we use a lot of buzzwords for things, depression and anxiety and things like that. And I was even reading an article this morning about it, and it was talking about how this gentleman was sharing his story about how he was, having suicidal ideation, and he was like, I would encourage you to really go and somebody will tell you like, oh, well, you're depressed if you're having that.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, no, he's like, really, I needed to talk to the anxiety within me first, not the depression part of it. And really, it all came down to his mindset.
Yeah.
And, I remember when we first got into working with one another, you would have weekends and sometimes like there would be long periods of time where we wouldn't talk.
Yeah.
And
true.
I remember telling you or asking you actually.
Yeah, you did.
A couple of times are you depressed? Like, is there something that, we can do to help because we didn't know?
Well, see, those were the kinds of questions that over the last 2 years have really, like I said, it's a process, really helped me to stop and go, is there validity in what she is saying? Because I always said, no, I'm not depressed, because I didn't think my mind was depressed in the sense that I thought depression was more about I can't do anything. I could still do things, but it was like I had emptied out.
When I think of depression, I think more of like Eeyore and his persona, not the depression where people say like it affects like your whole body. Those to me are like after effects.
They are.
Like
they're definitely, they coexist, is maybe the best way for me to describe it for myself. I can't say that's true for all of you out there, but when you have that, your body's going to respond, because think about it, the central part of our being is our brain. Everything that we know and experience, whether good or bad, it's stored up there, and our bodies are starting to respond to the heaviness of whatever. Like the overthinking side of it was exhausting, but the exhaustion came out like it looked like maybe depression or some kind of a mental thing, because I would say I just need rest to fuel back up. Well, honestly, I didn't need to refuel because I still had everything that I needed. I was allowing my belief system to say that that's what I needed, because I didn't know how exhausting it was to be an overthinker. I didn't know I was an overthinker.
Can you speak to the emotional side a little bit of it? Sure. I just want to touch base on the part where, like, even in your melancholy weekends, right, that we call, and I would call you just to be like, hey, how's it going? Yeah. Check in on you. A lot of the times you would be very emotional during those conversations.
It's true.
And so I just want to have you expand upon that a little bit more.
I think for me, emotions for a very long time were the only indicator of truth. So to me, my belief system was askewed. If I felt it, it was real. And I can't say I know exactly where all of that came from, but what happens is I felt emotional because I didn't want to be a melancholy person, or I didn't want people to see me that way. So whenever it got brought up, I would just start to cry.
Yeah.
There were a lot of times when Jenna would ask me a very simple question. We were having a meeting or whatever, and she'd say, can you tell me why we're going back there? And I'd start to cry. And the reason I would cry is because somewhere in me, I was like, they don't like this. They don't like me. They're questioning me. I'm not good enough. So when we hear that kind of thing and we get emotional, it's not a far distance to a sense of depression. As a believer, I understand that we have an enemy of our souls who wants us to believe all the wrong things about ourselves.
Yeah.
When we say we're ember igniters here, that's because we understand that sometimes the passion or the purpose of our life diminishes. And we want to fan the truth. So it's been a process for me. I'm still in it, but emotionally I'm not as attached.
Yeah.
I don't know how else to say that.
No, I think you explained it really well. And I think even when you say diminished, I think that you're not thinking about the right things. So if you're thinking about, they don't like me and all of that, that mind frame, you're not thinking about your goal or your dream. And in order for that to come to any sort of fruition, your mindset has to be on those dreams and goals. It has to be on what are those baby steps that you're doing to get towards them.
Right.
What are you doing, and what are the choices that you're making that are leading you to where your life purpose is and where you're intended to go?
can I just interrupt and say that when you say that in my past, I would have said, I don't have the energy for even what you're telling me to do right now. Focus on a goal.
But that links to the fatigue, right?
It leads to the fatigue. So that's exactly the point, right? If you don't want to be fatigued, if you don't want to feel the way that you're feeling or have those thoughts in your mind, you have to make a choice.
Yes.
And the choice is, do I stay here or do I get up and do something about it?
And I think that's interesting that we've heard for so long, excuse me, we've heard for so long about successful people and how they do these crazy habits and do these things. True. And I think even in the beginning for us, both of us were like, how in the world do they do that? Right. Or the 5 a.m. club, you're nuts. Why do you want to be there? But here I am, happy person to be there. Because as an overthinker, I would assume, because I'm not one, but is that something that looks just overwhelming that you're like, oh my gosh, I don't even know where to start, so like I can't do it? Is that
it's paralyzing? Actually, I just got to say, sometimes you don't know that you're paralyzed, but you're thinking about the big elephant. I know a lot of you know that analogy, right? Here's a big elephant. What are you going to do with it? Well, you have to take small bites, but to an overthinker, we can't imagine small bites. Everything leads to the next thing, and it becomes the big elephant in the room. And so all of these sort of symptomatic things begin to happen until I'm going to say that this is probably very likely. I'm not an alcoholic or a drug user, but any addiction has that same component to it. You feel it, you have to be doing it, have to have the next thing, the next thought, or the next thing. But there comes a time in your life when you become dissatisfied for whatever reason, right?
Yeah.
And it's the moment, I think it was the moment that I said, I'm an overthinker. We all know what happens in AA. People say, hi, I'm Fran and I'm an alcoholic. The reason they make you do that is that you speak it out. You acknowledge it for what it is. Now you're able to say, I'm going to bring that down. I'm going to take one small bite. It's not the whole elephant or the whole banana, whichever you want to choose to eat.
Yeah, because sometimes you got to start small.
You do.
Small's not bad.
Yeah. And I'm going to say this. The minute that you see yourself having accomplished one small step in the right direction, it's like fuel on the fire.
Was it an overnight thing that...
I don't think so. I think that it played into my overthinking mind, where I did think on it, but not to the point of going the full length. I could stop the think and say, okay, I think this is where I am. If that's true, then how do I move away from that? And so for me, it really has been and continues to be this place of, I have to say intentionally, intentionally learning to button my lip, listen. And what I've discovered, many of you would probably go, yeah, this is right, is that if I wait long enough, someone else will come up with the same question or have the answer for me before I even have to ask the question. Sometimes not. No, but I mean, it's also there. So it takes risking yourself, being vulnerable and recognizing you're not going to get it all in the moment. And I think that's another reason why perhaps the terminology is recovering.
Yeah. Right. I hear you.
Not recovered.
Right.
Past tense.
Sure.
It's an ongoing process, even for me.
Yeah. I think it is for a lot of people. I don't think it's a night and day thing. Unfortunately, there's a lot of cons that come with overthinking. People who aren't overthinkers may look at you as like an overanalyzer.
I'm sure.
Or somebody who paralyzes the process of forward movement and things like that. One of the terms we use in the military is spotlight ranger. The person that's always got to be in the spotlight wherever it is, or make it about them, or not allow anyone else to shine in it because, they know everything. And it's something that we don't necessarily set out to be. It just happens because of our life experiences and how they've unfolded, and how they mold us into what we are.
That's a really, really important thing to say, Jenna, because there might be people listening today who, they didn't set out to become addicted to any kind of chemical or any kind of alcohol. It just, life took over.
Well, it's all a slippery slope.
Yeah.
And I think even it's a slippery slope into depression, or what people call depression. As someone who's recovered from depression, it was definitely my mindset. Once I changed my mindset, I was able to overcome that. I've never experienced the anxiety portion of that. Thank goodness. I can't imagine what those people experience. I would love to pray for those people, to be honest, because I know that part is paralyzing to them, and the fear stops them from taking that one step that would lead them to their breakthrough. And to be able to live a full and abundant life that has been made for us and is ready for us.
That's right.
And I just feel like there's a lot of people out there who struggle with all of these things, who aren't able to live out their purpose. Sometimes people don't even know their purpose right now. And that's what we want to be able to share. We have started a global movement to help people find their purpose and live out their calling. And this podcast and the curriculums that we have are all geared towards that. We want people to know that they have a purpose, they were made for a purpose, and they have a calling. And it's our job as people to seek that calling and to carry it out before we perish from this earth.
That's right.
And I thank you so much for being vulnerable and telling your story so that others can relate to the topic and go, oh, that is me, and be able to open some more eyes.
I just want to end with saying, it's easy to hear a person talk about doing something and thinking, well, how am I going to do that? I think that as a recovering overthinker, you don't think about it anymore. You absolutely go to your mind and you say to your mind, I'm stopping that. So when you say, what's the practical way, is you just determine, I don't want to be a person who is melancholy and drained and fatigued, and I have a message and I want it to be heard, so I'm going to try to improve. You can do this.
So can you tell us about a time that maybe you spent a lot of time overthinking about something, and looking back on it now it might seem trivial?
That is the perfect question for an overthinker. Because that is what happens all too frequently. In my career, there have been projects that may have come my way, and because I was such an overthinker, I went well beyond the scope of the project. Because think about it, I would want to make sure every step. And I would go through all of this and have a whole plan, and I would spend hours, putting it all to paper so that I could present it out. And in the end, the decision that they made about the project was cut way back in the early process of my thinking. So all that extra time that I put into it thinking this was going to make it or break it was really, it didn't matter.
Wow.
They didn't need all of that. They just needed basic information, like why I talk too much. I feel like all that background is important. It's not. If you give them what they need, or if I only think about what is in front of me and not go beyond that, I'm way better off. And I'm learning that. That's what I mean about listening, that whole process. So part of me also wants to say that, sure, you're hearing us talk about it and you're hearing me say it, but you're thinking,